Welcome to the Burn Factory Podcast with Priest and Phoenix Rivera. Listen as the boys interview the biggest names in sports and entertainment. The Burn Factory starts now.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Burn Factory Podcast. I'm your host, Priest, joined by my co-host, my brother, the one and only Phoenix. Say what's up to the camera.
What's up, y'all?
This is called the Burn Factory for a reason. I was literally caught on fire. 50% chance to survive, but through that started this podcast because I believe every single person out there on this planet goes through a burn moment somewhere in their life.
You heard Priest say a burn moment. So a burn moment is a really hard time in your life that you just have to fight and to get through to ultimately get you where you are today. And me and Priest believe that every single person on this earth go through burn moments that truly build them to who they are. But what an amazing guest we have today. Our guest has shown the pinnacle of never losing hope. He was the cage sport featherweight and lightweight champion. He was also the prime fighting featherweight champion and is now fighting in the UFC Featherweight division.
So please give a warm welcome to Julian Erosa.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Welcome.
Of course, so I hear you're an avid snowboarder and skateboarder.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's kind of what got me into just sports in general. I started skateboarding at a young age, snowboarding as well, and I feel like fighting kind of fell into that in the sense of I wasn't much of a team sport player. I was kind of a soloist, and so skateboarding, snowboarding, and even fighting. We have a team, but when you go in there, it's all you.
What age did you start learning snowboarding?
I started skateboarding when I was like, I would say about 10 or 11, and then I transitioned into snowboarding a couple years after that.
Okay.
We just went snowboarding. We went up to Breckenridge, Colorado.
Oh, it's beautiful up there. I've been there before. My one of my old friends was a electrician up there. Got us up there for about a week. The town's amazing. I mean, I know that's where they shot a lot of Dumb and Dumber as well. So
really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so they actually did a lot of it in Breckenridge, but it's a beautiful little town, little Christmas town.
It's funny, we were born in Colorado and we never went snowboarding, like ever. And then now 7 years ago we moved to California, and now we've been snowboarding more since living in California.
Yeah. You'd think if living in California, you go surfing a lot, but don't go surfing at all. And then we went to Breckenridge, how Phoenix said, oh my gosh, there's the funniest story. So we went up there, started learning the first day, got the hang of it, and Phoenix kind of got a little too cocky on the second day, and he pulled out the vlog camera. He's like, look at me go. Completely catches his front edge, does a front flip, and just boom, off the ice, and his glove goes sliding across, and the snowmobile girl, lifeguard or whatever she is, I don't even know, the ski mountain person comes over. She's like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you okay? And Phoenix is like, yeah, I think so.
It was bad. It was a bad spill.
Yeah, it can be a bit rough. I've been very lucky in my skateboarding, snowboarding, and fighting career that I haven't really gotten any injuries. I mean, superficial stuff like cuts. I've had stitches and stuff before, but never broken anything, never torn anything. So I've been very lucky in that sense.
Wow.
And not only with fighting, because fighting is, we protect each other as teammates and stuff, but when you're, the ground is unforgiving, I mean, the ice is hard. You can bust yourself on the ice, but also with skateboarding. That's why I kind of stopped skateboarding as much, because the concrete's unforgiving, and my career is based on my physical abilities. So I would hate to go skateboard and break my arm or break my leg and not be able to fight for a year because of it. So it can be unforgiving sometimes.
When did you kind of stop skateboarding and snowboarding?
I mean, I snowboard more than I skateboard, only because the snow is a bit softer than concrete. But I would say, skateboarding, I stopped doing as much as I used to do it probably about 5 or 6 years ago when I moved to Las Vegas. Plus, in Vegas, it's so hot here that it's like you can only skateboard in the summertime for 20, 30 minutes before you're basically dehydrated. So.
Yeah, stepping off the plane. So we just came from Wyoming, and coming here, we landed at 9 p.m. and I was like, oh my God, it was still 100 degrees outside.
Yeah.
I could not live here. I don't think so. It's way too hot.
Yeah, that's and that's also, I mean, one of the tough things about it too is it's super dry heat. So it pulls the fluid out of you, especially if you're training every day and you don't realize it as well, that you're getting dehydrated as dehydrated as you are. And so you definitely got to be careful and make sure you're drinking a lot of water because it's so dry here.
I feel like being a fighter here is actually kind of good because it's so hot. Like, say you're fighting here in July, you can just go outside in a sauna suit and run a mile and be losing 13 pounds already.
I feel like the biggest advantage of being a fighter in Las Vegas is the majority of the fights are here, whether you're talking about the Apex, the T-Mobile Arena, or anywhere here in Las Vegas, is because, you know, if you're training here, then it's always good to fight in the same atmosphere that you're training. Because people that come to Vegas and they, you know, I trained with a lot of guys that come in here and they're like, have a hard time catching their wind because they're not used to the dry heat. And so when you're used to it and you can kind of push through it, then when you fight in Vegas, it helps out a lot. It kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage, almost like if you fight in Colorado where it's like the Mile High City. And there's different advantages and disadvantages to fighting and training in Las Vegas.
Is it hard for you to adjust, like when you go to somewhere else?
Not necessarily. When I did move to Vegas, the first week and a half, it was there was an adjustment period, and I definitely felt that. But since I've lived here for 6 years, I'm already accustomed to it and acclimated to it. So it's actually my advantage now. So every time I try to fight, I want to fight at the Apex or the T-Mobile Arena because I've been here for 6 years.
Yeah. Where were you living before you moved here?
Washington State.
Oh, okay. Washington.
And so you were born there, right?
Yeah, I was born in Seattle and then lived the majority of my life in Yakima, which is kind of a small town east Washington.
Are you a Seahawks fan then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're Commanders fans.
Yeah, we're Commanders fans over here. Sad team to be a fan for.
That's where you really find the true fans is through the downs. You know, if your team's doing well, it's easy to be a fan of those guys and it's easy to jump on the bandwagons. But when your team's not doing so well, then it really goes to show who's the real fan.
Exactly. So, Julian, on this podcast, we do use the acronym BURN. So each letter is kind of a different time in your life. So starting with B stands for beginning. Okay. Take us back to your childhood. Were there some burn moments that you had to fight and overcome to get you to where you are today? For me, I was pretty lucky that I had a pretty good childhood. My parents were, they both owned businesses and, they kind of, supplied me with whatever I wanted. Not necessarily with whatever I wanted, but they were very supportive of things I wanted to do. Like, they never really pushed me into doing, like, football at school or school activities. They were cool with me skateboarding because they understood that it was something that I enjoyed doing. And so they gave me a lot of motivation and a lot of helped me, like, kind of grow through my passions. And but one thing that was, kind of early on, I'm 33 now, so when I was about 19, my dad ended up having brain cancer, so getting diagnosed with brain cancer. And then it was kind of a weird situation because, like, it's not like my dad got in a car wreck and died. He had brain cancer, and we had about a year and a half of, surgeries he had to do. And so it was almost like a delayed death, like I had to see him kind of go through these things. And then he had 3 brain surgeries and ended up passing away a year and a half in. And my mom tried hiding most of that from us. It was tough though. I was an adult, so like it's hard for me or hard for her to hide it from us. And so that was kind of the weird situation. If my dad would have gotten in a car wreck and he would have died, it would have been tragic. But it just felt different because he had brain cancer and it was like an elongated period of time, which was just such a weird situation. But going through that really helped me understand that like there's nothing in life that can be that as hard as that, really. I mean, not necessarily for me, but like my mom and my dad having to go through that on their end. Like, if I go fight and I lose, I'm still gonna, I still have my life. I still have people who love me, and it's just a fight, Mm-hmm. So it really put that kind of stuff in perspective for me. But I would say that was probably the biggest, one of the biggest tough moments in my life growing up. So how did you kind of get through that? Was there something that you went to help like bring peace to your mind?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we all have these outlets, right? Skateboarding, snowboarding. I was very avid skateboarder and snowboarder back then. So I just, preoccupied myself with doing that. And I was also training. So like just kind of keeping myself busy. And my mom kind of pushed us to do that as well. Like instead of staying at home and seeing my dad, because my mom was kind of his caretaker for a little bit of time. So he was at home. And so we would see these things. And so she tried helping the situation by making us be as preoccupied as possible. And I knew what she was doing. And so like, you definitely are going to hold some of these feelings in, but, and try to distract yourself a little bit. But I think it was, it was good on her to push us to kind of preoccupy us during that time.
How old were you whenever?
I was 19 when my dad was diagnosed, and he passed away right before I turned 21.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss.
It's life, man. People get cancer, and there's no rhyme or reason. He had brain cancer, and they say it's one of those things that just, it's not like genetic or anything. It just happens to certain people. And my dad was, relatively healthy, and such a good dude too. So that was really the big part. I don't know if it's worse if you don't know your dad and he passes away, or if you know your dad and he's a good guy and then he passes away, because my dad was a really good dude and ended up getting brain cancer. And we always, kind of harped my mom because she smoked cigarettes. And we're like, well, do you want to be around when you're, when I have grandkids, when you have grandkids, and, if you smoke cigarettes, you might get cancer and this and that. Years down the line, my dad gets cancer, and he didn't really smoke. He didn't really drink, just was an average, typical American. And he just, went to work and then came home, and he was a good dude. And it just goes to show some of the best people can have horrible things happen to them, and vice versa.
Yeah, cancer is one of the worst things. Like our grandmother, she passed away of pancreatic cancer, and it's just comes out of nowhere. You're almost blindsided by it.
Or even his situation, Priest's situation, catching on fire. I know a kid who was in a car, and the guy was driving pretty erratically. They get in a car accident, and his name is Martin, and he trains at Extreme Couture and also at 10th Planet, and he's burned 90% of his body's burned too. Yeah, he bad, and he's missing about this much of his hand, and he has to wear a patch over his eye because his eyesight's pretty messed up, or one of his eyes is kind of messed up, and it's just those types of things can happen to the best of us,
Yeah, this is actually leading us right into you and Bern. Unfortunate, like how you said, some of the most happiest people and so loving can just get the worst side possible. And
100%.
kind of like myself, I was just a normal kid and went to school one day. Teacher says she's going to do a science experiment. And next thing you know, I was in the hospital for a week having 7 surgeries, fighting for my life.
Yeah, it's insane. And even this girl, Maria, trains at Extreme. We just found out she has cancer, and, she's going through the treatment for that too. It's and obviously, you don't necessarily know everybody's, backstory, but I know a lot of bad people that live really long lives, even in jail and prison. You watch some of those shows of people that were serial killers that live to be old in prison. What do they do to deserve a long life, or some people that get away with certain things, and it just makes you kind of question things sometimes.
For sure. And the most unfortunate burn moments can be some of the best burn moments possible. If that doesn't happen to me, I don't have this podcast. And I'm sure if your dad doesn't pass away, I'm sure you're totally different than where you're at today.
100%, and no one will know, right? You don't know, the trials and tribulations is what kind of form us as who we are today. So who knows? Maybe if I didn't drink that cup of coffee 7 years ago, what if I'm not doing the same thing I'm doing now? It could be something as small as that, or it could be something big, right? So it could be a combination of different things and a lot of variables.
Yeah, I would say being a bystander to all that stuff is really tough. For me, I remember getting the call from my dad that he had been burned, and I was first week of summer. I was so happy, out of school, and I was golfing with my buddies on a golf course. And I get the call, and my dad's like, "Hey, your brother's been burned. We're going to the hospital right now." And I was like, "Oh, maybe he was messing with a hot glue gun and he burned his finger or something to that." And he's like, "No, they might fight for life him right now. It was that serious." And I'll never forget. Didn't even say anything. I hung up the phone. I turned to the woods and I took my golf club and I hit the ball so hard. Yeah. And ironically, it was the best shot of the entire day. But it was kind of back to that. It's why him? He was 12 years old. That's not my brother. Yeah. There's a different type of love and connection that we have. And then you start thinking well, why couldn't it have been me? I was older at the time. Why couldn't it have been me? And so for you, I know you hinted on your dad passing away, but were there any other unfortunate times in your life that you had to go through?
Honestly, I gotta say I was pretty lucky in the grand scheme of it all, and I'm pretty easygoing and I'm pretty optimistic, and even when my dad was sick, it was one of those things that I kind of just informed myself that this is life. These are things that happen in life, and you can make the best of it or you can make the worst of it, and a good example of that as well is my brother, who was an alcoholic, and he was clean and sober while this was happening to my dad, and he could have gone two ways. He could have went down the rabbit hole and been drinking and maybe became a drug addict or whatever the situation is, or he could have turned his life into a positive situation, and that's what he's done. So and it's same with me. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I could have done the same thing. I could have went down the rabbit hole of doing bad things and just kind of given up on life, because when you see something like that happen, you start to question life and the intentions behind it and like what's happening to you and all the stuff that's going on. And so like you can take it and you can go negative with it, or you can stay positive about it. And I think the attitude can change, can really change a lot of people's minds, and just it can move mountains.
So you were fighting at the time of this. You're like 19 years old.
Yeah.
How did losing your dad kind of affect your fighting?
Well, me and him started watching the WC because it was free at the time. I'm going way back. I'm 15, 16 years ago. Back when the UFC had like one pay-per-view every like 6 months or something. We used to watch the WC because it was free, and we weren't huge fans of it at the time, but we kind of got into it together watching it. And he's like, well, hey, you're kind of built like that Donald Cerrone guy. Maybe you should try some of this stuff. And I was like, well, maybe I will. And actually I had I think it was 5 amateur fights when my dad got sick. Actually, even before he got sick, it was probably only like 2 amateur fights I had when he got sick. But right when he passed, I actually had a fight scheduled literally the weekend afterwards. I think he passed away. Can't remember exactly what day it was, but I think it was on like a Sunday, Saturday or Sunday. And the next weekend I had a fight, and my coach asked me if I wanted to pull out of it. Like, obviously, like some people would just want to pull out, but I was like, let's just fight, and ended up winning that fight. But it was one of those things that it gave me even more of a hunger and a push to go win that fight, because he's the one who introduced me to fighting. And so, well, not necessarily introduced me, but we watched it together and we kind of bonded over that. So I didn't want to, there was, it's kind of the attitude, right? Like I could just like kind of, feel sorry for myself, feel sorry for my family, and not chase those things down. But I feel like if you can use those things for motivation, it's better than using it as something negative.
I agree. It's kind of like what we were talking about before. Like some fighters do pull out of fights with little things, but the fact that you like stood in there and went through like one of the most tragic things in your entire life is amazing to see. So
well, I also feel like it was a little bit of that preoccupying myself. A way to get some aggression out.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because my mom used to harp on me for getting into fights before I started fighting. I'd gotten some just some scuffles at the skate park and just small town stuff, and then she used to harp on me and get me in trouble for doing that kind of stuff. And now that I fight people, she's like rooting for me to beat somebody up. So it's funny how that table kind of turns, But yeah, she was there, watching me fight that night. And so I think it gave her some. It was kind of a way to preoccupy not only myself but my whole family.
What made you want to get into professional fighting?
Well, I'd been fighting as an amateur for about a year and a half. Had 10 amateur fights and was doing pretty well. And the coach at the time, Rich Guerin, he was promoting and matchmaking for the Emerald Queen show, Cage Sport. And he's like, well, there's a handful of professional guys I know you could beat, like at the professional level. He's like, do you want to fight professionally? And I was like, all right. He's like, you'll get paid. And I'm like, I'm doing it for free now, actually paying money for tickets for my family to come watch me fight. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then, it kind of just snowballed. It was a hobby. And it still is a hobby. And I feel like you can't stray from that, because once you start doing it for the wrong reasons, then it can, be more of a chore than it is a hobby. And that's why I got into fighting, is because I love to fight. And if I stop loving to fight, I don't think I'm going to want to do it anymore.
Agreed. So then you turn professional and then you go on to the Ultimate Fighter show. Yep. So kind of talk about what that being on that show was and what it did for your career.
Yeah, I was 14-2 going into the Ultimate Fighter, and it was Conor and Uriah Faber, and so it was just like I was so young, naive, and just kind of ignorant to it all, and that's kind of what helped me through that whole experience, because I was just I was just having a good time, and I didn't know anything about the competitors. I was fighting a kid named Mehdi Baghdad from the European side, and I remember all the guys, all the coaches like Uriah Faber and all those other coaches were like, "Oh, you got to watch out. This guy's got good striking. Like, let's look to take him down," because he was a world champion kickboxer. And so, but like me just being naive about the whole situation, I was like, I don't care. Like, we're here to fight. Like, I'm gonna stand up and fight with him. Yeah, I'm down to fight on the feet. But they were like pretty adamant about taking him down because that's his strong suit was on the feet. And so, but I ended up going in there and fighting him for 2 rounds, and I ended up getting the win in a completely 100% stand-up fight against a world champion kickboxer. So it was one of those things that just being young and naive kind of helped me. Like, I didn't really take I didn't take anything really all that serious. You know, it was I was just doing it for fun. You know, it was one of those things that I just really enjoyed doing and didn't necessarily care about, you know, the risks or the rewards about it. I just wanted to do it and have a fun time doing it. And so, but I fought a lot of tough guys on The Ultimate Fighter and just was naive to the fact of their skill sets and just had fun doing my thing. And I did really well in the show. I was 3-1, and you know, I was a bit unlucky in the sense that Conor's like best friend Artem Lobov lost to Mehdi Baghdad to get into the house. This was back in the days when you had to win your spot into the house. Yeah. So it was a bit tougher back then, and so I fought Jason Suarez, who was actually undefeated black belt, to get in the house, and then Mehdi Baghdad fought Artem. Artem lost, but he was Conor's right hand man, so they finagled his way back into the house after losing the fight, and then I beat Mehdi Baghdad and then Abner Lovas, and then I had to fight Artem and got knocked out by Artem, and it just felt a little unfair to me because if he didn't get put back into the competition, I probably would have fought for the title of the Tough 22 champion. So and they actually ended up bringing Ryan Hall back because I had just fought Artem on the very last fight, and then Saul Rogers, who was supposed to fight Artem, had some visa issues, and so they brought back an American. So Ryan Hall ended up winning the show with the same record in the house that I had. We were both 3-1 in the house, and so it was just like it just felt a little unfair in the sense of like Conor being able to like finagle his best friend back into the house after he lost. You know, but it's one of those things. I was kind of naive to it at the moment, and then after, you know, coming back home, I kind of seen it. I was like, well, I guess that makes sense. And I'm not trying to take away from Artem. I mean, yeah, he beat me fair and square. And if I was best friends with Conor McGregor or a guy like him, I'd probably ride his coattails as well. You know, a little bit. You know,
those are some unfortunate burn moments. But going back to the Ultimate Fighter, how does like the fighting work? Do you actually fight like once a week, or do you fight like twice a week, or how does it like work?
Yeah, so like that season was a bit different too, because a lot of seasons they have 2 weight classes. But for that season, they decided that there wasn't enough talent at 170, and so they were just going to do a whole house of 155ers. And so instead of winning 3 fights to win the whole show, you end up having to win 4 fights, or actually even 5 fights, I think. It was just because we also had to fight to get in the house. So it was just like a pretty crazy situation. Yeah, we were there for 7 weeks. I fought 4 times in 7 weeks. And that's why a lot of people do the Ultimate Fighter up a weight class. So I did the Ultimate Fighter at 155, but I'm a featherweight because there's just like, it would be very hard to make weight 4 times because I usually have like 6 or 7 weeks to make weight once and have a fight. And in the house, I fought 4 times in 7 weeks. So it was a bit, and also not only the whole weight cut thing, it's just like, you know, getting banged up and bruised up. You know, basically the Ultimate Fighter was more of a trying to keep you healthy kind of situation. You go out and fight and then see what's going on, you know, or you kind of bust it up here or there and then kind of adjust your training schedule to that. We weren't really training super hard because, especially if you were still in the competition, it was like you were just trying to keep tools sharp and go and fight, stay healthy, keep tools sharp, go fight and stay healthy, and just trying to progress through the competition. And so that was that was just kind of a whirlwind of itself because, you know, even before that, I was fighting like once every few months, 3 or 4 months, I was fighting once. And in that, you know, 2-month period or month and a half, 2-month period, I fought 4 times, and they were all exhibitions, so they don't even count on your record really. Yeah. And I was 3-1, so that was a big. it was just a bit overwhelming at the time. But like I said, I was young and naive and just happy to be there. So I was willing to fight 100 times.
Yeah. Was it hard on your body, like the 4th fight?
Specifically for me, it wasn't because I was able to avoid a lot of injuries. I mean, you know, I took damage in some of those fights, you know, but nothing that was substantial that I couldn't, heal up after, a week, of after the fight, and at least be 80 to 90% ready for my next fight.
What's the biggest burn moment you learned from being on the Ultimate Fighter that's got you to where you're at today?
Specifically, kind of going back to that Artem and Connor situation, is it kind of becomes who you know more than what you know. And that's kind of what led me out to Las Vegas and kind of switched over my management to Jason House, because Iridium has just been so accommodating, and just, I mean, I was 1-4 in the UFC, cut for the second time, and he still had his idea about getting me into the UFC, and I was like, there's no way they're gonna want me. He's like, no, we can make this happen. And so having somebody who's backing your name, that has the ability and the connections, just as hard as your training, is so key in this sport, and I think maybe in any sport really, but most importantly in the UFC and in fighting in general, because I did. Before I was with Iridium, I knocked out Jamal Emmers on the Contender Series with a head kick knockout, and I was a 3-1 underdog, and they didn't sign me off that, which was absolutely insane. And I think the Contender Series back then was a little different than it is now, but I mean, the whole idea of Contender Series is to get a highlight reel finish over a really good dude, and Jamal Emmers is in the UFC right now, and I was able to get a head kick highlight reel knockout. It was a great fight. If you go watch that fight back, it's entertaining, fun, and wasn't able to get signed off of that performance. And then, a few days after I signed with Iridium, he's like, "Yo, we can do a short notice fight in Colorado. What do you feel about it?" I'm like, "Let's do it!" Like, I couldn't believe how quickly he was able to get me into the UFC, and so. From the Ultimate Fighter, I really learned that it's not necessarily what you know, but who you know.
Mm-hmm. How hard was that to fathom, like getting a nice knockout on Dana White's Contender Series? Like, how mentally challenging was that for you?
Yeah, it was tough, man. I knocked him out, and obviously you have the high. My whole family's there watching it, and it's like it's such an intimate setting, because it was at the old Ultimate Fighter gym. So it's like, I mean, it's kind of like the Apex in a sense as well, that it's very intimate like that, and there's nobody there but the fighters' families, Dana, some of the other UFC people as well, and then your coaches. And so after you get a win like that, it's just an unreal feeling. I mean, obviously, fighting in front of Dana White as well and getting a win like that in front of him is just, the highest of highs in this sport. And so, man, I felt so good about it. Went in the bag, changed my stuff, came back out, and was talking to friends and family, and I was just like, oh, that's a shoo-in. There's no way he can't. I mean, I thought, because I had already been on the Ultimate Fighter, I had already been in the UFC, I felt like if I got a win over Jamal Emmers, being an underdog against him, because I felt like he was the prospect they were looking for. And so for me to get a win over him, no matter what, even if it's kind of a boring fight, they're probably going to sign me. And that's kind of how it is now in the Contender Series. They line guys up that are kind of prospects, and if they get the win, they usually get signed. And so that's how I felt about it back then. And then not only that, I got the knockout. So it really kind of was just the best it probably could have happened for me. I couldn't have really, imagined it better than it happened. And actually, we had a really fun first round, and he dropped me at the end of the first round. And then for me to come back and knock him out the way I did was just, it was the best way I could have drawn it up. And then to be sitting there and they're like calling people for the contracts, and Dana White said he wasn't going to sign me, but that to keep doing what I'm doing. I was just like, man, doing what I'm doing. I had like 7 fights outside the UFC in between those stints, in between my stints, and I was like, what else do you want me to be doing? This is like what I should be doing. I'm here on the Contender Series to prove myself again, and I've proved myself. But it's it's one of those things that just kind of gives you that underdog feeling and makes you want to work harder and showcase and just show everybody up again. And so it sucks in a sense, but I feel like if everything's handed to you, it can take away that hunger from you, and so. It was more of a positive underlining.
Yeah, it made you more hungrier.
Yeah.
What year was this?
I would say like 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, it was before the pandemic for sure. Man, I don't even know what season it was of the Contender Series.
Yeah.
But one thing that I did also learn too was part of that whole Artem and Connor thing about who you know a little bit is Shevchenko's sister, Antonina Shevchenko, was the main event on our Contender Series. She had a short notice replacement fight against this other girl who was a 9-1 underdog against Shevchenko, and Shevchenko ended up TKOing her kind of on the elbows, like one of those like not like crazy TKOs, but it was just kind of like the girl wasn't fighting back, so they stopped the fight. But since the Shevchenko sisters would be the first sisters in the UFC, she obviously got signed off that. And then for them to surpass me it just showed me that it's a little bit about who you know. And then even the heavyweight after me, I can't remember the guy's name. Man, he's in the UFC now too. But he did a spinning back fist or spinning back kick knockout, which I was like, man, heavyweights do not do that. Parisian, I think I was Parisian. But he did that, and they, instead of giving him a contract with the UFC, they told him he was going to appear on the next Ultimate Fighter at heavyweight, which I feel like the Ultimate Fighter was actually kind of a step down from Contenders, because the Ultimate Fighter is something you kind of have to battle through a bunch of different guys to get a contract with the UFC. The Contenders is better, and I think Contenders, overall is better than the Ultimate Fighter in the sense of like you got to go out there and fight one time. If you do good, you get signed. Versus having to battle your way through. I had to battle my way through some of the best guys on my show, and to get my contract. So and I almost didn't get it off the Ultimate Fighter. So like that was almost like I felt like that was kind of a slap in the face for him too, because like when do you ever see heavyweights doing spinning anything? And this guy did a spinning back fist knockout and didn't get signed. So I was like, man, I felt bad for myself, but I also felt bad for him. I felt bad for some of the other guys that got overlooked because Shevchenko's sister was on there, and they were obviously holding a spot for her.
I feel like that's super common now, because you see Dana White's Contender Series now, and they're signing guys who win by decision now.
Yes.
It's crazy. They're almost letting everyone in.
Well, and even there was a couple guys, I think, that got signed off of losing. They just had a great fight, and they signed them off that, or even, and then it just, I just think it's a little inconsistent in the sense of like, you see some guys that have, will go and fight and win, and they're like, well, we're just going to bring you back to the Contender Series. And they 3-4 fights in the Contender Series, like, I don't think they should. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand how they like to run it or what they're specifically looking for, but I feel like it can be a little inconsistent in some sense. And even just maybe just the time difference as well. Back when I fought Contenders versus now, it seems like they're letting more guys in now than they were back when I was fighting Contender Series. Or even like some of my teammates, Chris Curtis is a good example. He got a heel kick knockout at welterweight, and they didn't sign him. Dan Ige is a good example too. Dan Ige demolished his opponent with wrestling, grappling, striking, and ended up choking the guy out and didn't get signed. And look at all three of us now are in the UFC. And Dan Ige is one of the best featherweights in the world. Chris Curtis is, you're talking about two guys that are ranked in the UFC now that didn't get signed off their wins and would have been highlights. Like if they did the same performances they did off Contender Series in the UFC, they probably would have got a bonus, or it would have been a fight of the night kind of situation. So the fact that they didn't get signed off that was I think it's just more of, it was back in the day when they were first coming out with Contender Series, and I think maybe they were still trying to figure out how they were going to make it work to where they weren't signing too many guys or missing out on some guys. I don't know. But now it definitely seems like if they have their eye on you and you just win your fight, they're going to sign you.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing to see, because you guys, after being told no so many times, you just kept going. And to see you guys in the UFC now, it's super cool to see.
Yeah, me and Chris Curtis have very similar stories. We're veterans we're veterans of the sport, not even with the UFC necessarily beforehand. Me and him have, I got almost, I'm one shy away from 40 pro fights. And Chris Curtis is hovering around the same area as well. And just been around the block, and I feel like we paid our dues for so long and just have been told no for so long that finally when we got there, it was, it was kind of a weight off our shoulders. But, I was talking to him today about it as well, as like, when you finally get there, you feel like a relief, but like, this is when you really want to feel that hunger. Like like even after a couple of my wins that I had over like Steven Peterson or Dawodu, like I felt like I had reached the mountaintop. But once you start getting a little bit too comfortable, you can lose sight of why you started doing this and kind of lose that hunger. And so me and him were talking about it today. And when we were fighting, back when we were getting no's on the Contender Series, we had such a hunger that was insane. Like we were willing to fight for free. If back then Dana White said, hey, we'll sign you to a contract, but you got to do this fight for free for us, I feel like I would have said yes immediately. Like I would have, whatever you need. Like, and so you got to remember the way you thought back in those days when you're in the, when you're actually back, when you're in the UFC and you're at these high level situations and fighting these guys. You got to remember how hungry you were when we were fighting on the small shows and on the contenders and stuff like that.
We had Jason House on our podcast back in April, and he actually talked about it after the Dana White Contender Series.
Yeah.
Whenever you got the knockout and COVID happened, you would actually make weight every Friday and just waiting to get into the UFC, and finally you got your shot.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Yeah, just like I said, it's about who you know a little bit as well. And I'm lucky that I have a guy like Jason House that's really backing me and has really taken a liking to me as well. And so during that whole the whole COVID situation, so mind you, I already had two stints in the UFC, been cut. I was 1-4 in the UFC, and never thought I was going to be back in there. And Jason, reassured me like, no, we'll do it, man. We'll get you a couple fights out of the UFC, and then we'll get you back in. I had one fight back at Cage Sport against AJ Bryant, who was a decent fight. He was like 13-4 at the time, and he was a tough kid. I was able to get a submission over him. But anyways, right after that, literally, I fought in February that year of 2020, and then March, everything started shutting down. And so that was kind of lucky for me, because what was happening was fighters couldn't, make it because of COVID, a lot of restrictions in like Canada and international restrictions for these other fighters. And so it seemed like every single week there was like 3 or 4 or 5 guys falling off these cards because of COVID issues. And so Jason said, just stay ready, stay in shape, and there's going to be a short notice call, I'm telling you. And he actually told the whole gym under Casey Halstead at 10 Planet, all your guys stay ready. There's going to be short notice replacements that they're going to need. And if you guys are ready, you guys can make weight. You guys live in Vegas and your medicals are done. You're an easy puzzle piece to fit into their equation if they need you. And especially me, because I had already been in the UFC, and got my medicals done. So I was riding my bike every day. We were training only one time a day, kind of backdoor training where we weren't supposed to be training necessarily, but we were going to gyms, we were going to people's garages and stuff. And I was riding my bike like 50 miles like every day in the heat. Like it was in the summertime too. And so like 3 weeks prior to that, it was like my name was in the hat with a couple other guys on fallouts, and I just like it missed me. And then Sean Woodson had already actually chose somebody else. It was me, Daniel Pineda, and somebody else. And Daniel Pineda had said that he probably couldn't pass a test for the COVID. So I was like I wasn't the runner-up. I was the third guy. I wasn't the backup. I was the third guy. So I got so lucky because the next weekend they were going to Abu Dhabi, and so short notice replacements were going to happen during that whole period of time. So it was the last week they were here in Las Vegas before they went to Abu Dhabi, and I was like, you know what, they're probably not going to choose me. And then Wednesday rolled around, and actually Jason told me to go on Tuesday to get my medicals done because I was a possibility to fill in for that fight. And I'm sitting in the waiting room to get my blood taken, and he calls me and he said, "Hey man, sorry, they chose this kid from Texas. It turned out to be Daniel Pineda." So I ended up driving back home, and he's all like, he calls me back and he's like, "Hey man, just make sure you get your medicals done." He's like, "Something will pop up." And then the next day, I still got my medicals done. The next day he said, "You're in, brother." He's like, Daniel Pineda couldn't pass a couldn't pass a COVID test, so you're in. And luckily enough, I was kind of water loading every week. Wasn't making weight every week, but I was making myself ready to be able to make weight if I needed to. And it's tough, man. I'm a big featherweight, and so I was able to kind of I was doing my water loading and doing kind of the stuff that I do during the week of fight week, almost every single week, and we ended up doing a catch weight at 150, and actually made it as low as 148. And then, ended up getting my job back off that fight and got a bonus. And it was just one of those moments where, like if I didn't take these steps, like if I wasn't training as hard as I was, if I wasn't worrying about my weight, if I didn't get my medicals done, if I didn't have somebody like Jason House backing me, this opportunity it might have presented itself, but I might have not been ready for it. And so the fact that I had all these things had aligned, and it was probably the worst situation. It was probably this worst situation to have a UFC fight. I don't know if I'm fighting or not. My weight's kind of maybe going to be there or not. And then the training was kind of hit or miss because we didn't COVID. We didn't know what was going on. It was like almost like a summer party for adults at the time. So we were more worried about how we're going to pay our bills because we didn't. My wife was kind of getting laid off, and so I wasn't necessarily worried about getting a fight. I didn't think I was going to have an opportunity to get a fight. And so having someone like Jason House in my ear telling me, "Stay ready, it'll happen," that's really what kind of drove me to just work my ass off and stay ready for that fight. And off that fight, I got my job back with the UFC, and it's been, it's been such a roller coaster. And that was like the fight for sure that like embodied my style the most. Like, and not even my style, but my whole story. Like, just like going through adversity. Like I might have been down 2 rounds leading into that fight, or leading into that third round, and he drops me in the third round, and I end up having to drag him down and choke him out, and just kind of show the grit. And I think that's kind of just embodies my whole fighting style and my whole fight career.
Yeah, that fight really showed who you are. But how did you not lose faith during that time when you're continuous being like, oh, okay, you might fight. Oh, nope, sorry. And then you go to the next week, then the next week, then the next week.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you say that because the weekend before that, Camacho, I don't know if that's his first name or his last name, but Camacho had a fight that fell out for him, and Justin James that trains at Extreme, he ended up filling in for him super short notice, like I did with Sean Woodson the next weekend, and ended up getting a knockout and in like 30 seconds and got a bonus. And I was one of the names in the hats for that fight too. So it was like me, Justin James, and I think a couple other guys that was in the drawing to take that fight on short notice. And watching that happen for him that weekend, I was just like, God, man, that could have been me.
Yeah.
And literally it happened to me the next weekend. So like, it's you kind of just, I don't know. I think it's just about being optimistic. Like I've always been very optimistic, and it's hard not to be envious of other guys, but you can't make your feelings out to be what's happening to other people. Because if you do that, you can drive yourself crazy. Like if I get happy or sad when some people get shots and some people don't get shots, then it's like that's a waste of energy in my mind. So you got to be happy for people and just hope that it happens to you, and be able to capitalize on those opportunities. So I just wanted to make the most of any opportunity, and so I knew if I just stayed on top of my training, kept my weight down, that if the opportunity presented itself, I'd be ready. And if it didn't happen. It's one of those things. I had the Contender Series said no to me, lost 3 UFC fights and got cut for the second time. So I'd already been through adversity. So it was like that was nothing new to me. Especially in the sport and in the UFC. So I was like, if it happens, it happens. I'll make the most of it. If it doesn't, I've had worse things happen to me. So
I think the key thing is just always keeping a positive mindset and a positive outlook, and being like, okay, I wasn't supposed to fight in this fight. And then obviously the perfect fight aroused for you to be sitting here today. 100%.
Camacho is not the ideal matchup for me. I mean, he's a heavy hitting, kind of a knock you out kind of guy, like in the early goings of a fight. And if I would have maybe dragged that fight out, I could have had some success. But Sean Woodson was almost the perfect opponent for me because I knew that he was going to have a little bit of reach on me, but he wasn't going to have that one punch knockout power. He's, the guy's probably the tallest featherweight in the world. He's 6'2.5", and he fights at featherweight. And I thought I'm 6'1". I'm like one of the tallest featherweights. And I was like, I didn't even know who Sean Woodson was at the time. And I was like, well, maybe I should look him up. So I started looking him up. And I'm like, how was it? This guy's taller than me. This is insane. This is the first guy that I ever fought that was taller than me. And his reach was like 78 inches. And I was like, man, he was a Golden Gloves boxer. But the one good thing about the whole situation was I just knew he didn't have that like one punch knockout power. So I was like, as long as I just hang into this fight, hang into it, I can break him down mentally, physically. My cardio will be there. And I think from the outside looking in, a lot of people thought maybe I wasn't training, or training as hard. Like I just, because it was COVID. It was literally like right in the beginning of it when it seemed like all the gyms were closed and nobody was really training super hard unless you had a fight. If you were in a fight camp in the UFC, obviously you were training. So Sean was definitely training, but he might have thought I wasn't training. So I think he might have took that a little bit lightly and didn't realize that my cardio was going to hold up the whole fight. And I think that's eventually what broke him. And eventually I was able to get that sub. And I think it had to do with, my ability to have good cardio when he probably thought I didn't have good cardio.
Mm-hmm. And all the adversities you've been through in your life.
Yeah.
Like went through adversity in that fight alone, and you knew that you could pull it out of the fire at the right time.
And also I felt like, I almost felt like I was free rolling. Like it was like one of those things where it's just like, okay, I'm like, people already, like, even like when they had matched us up, like there was comments on the thing a couple of days beforehand saying that I was the sheep. They were just, or the lamb that they were just guiding to get slaughtered kind of thing. And they thought I was the biggest underdog on the whole card. And they called me the parlay killer because I killed everybody's parlays because I beat Sean Woodson when they thought for sure I was going to lose. I was 1-4 in the UFC, and a lot of people, don't see the 20-something other wins I have outside the UFC. Like, it's insane. Like, I have like a lot of good wins over tough guys. Some guys that, never made it to the UFC that I fought in the regional shows, maybe could have made it to the UFC under the right circumstances. Everybody, things happen to people. You have kids, you go through, you get married, you have divorces, you have family tragedies that happen, injuries, all these kind of things. But it doesn't take away their abilities. And I fought a lot of guys that were, undefeated on some of these regional shows that were really good and up and coming prospects, and was able to beat those guys. And people, they only see your UFC fights. And so being 1-4 in the UFC, and the only time I ever won was off the Ultimate Fighter. So that was like my very first UFC fight at that time. People were really only like relating my fighting ability to my 4 losses in the UFC. They weren't, because that's all they could really, they weren't going down the rabbit hole of the YouTube and looking up Julian's regional show when he fought, cage sport titles, and fought tough kids. I fought Daniel Swain, who was on the Contender Series. I fought Austin Springer, who actually tried out for the Ultimate Fighter that I was on, and I beat him for a title. So it's like, people don't, a lot of these trolls, I would say, they like to post and say these stuff just based off your performances on TV, on the UFC, when a lot of us guys have so many fights outside the UFC. Yeah. There's such a, nowadays it's a little different. I feel like guys have less records before the UFC than they used to have. But for me, it's like, the majority of my fights are outside of the UFC, and I have a lot of good wins out there, and that people don't relate my fighting to because they only relate it to what's in the UFC and the Ultimate Fighter.
Do you think that's really helped you being in the UFC, is having so many amateur fights and fights outside of the UFC?
Well, yeah, 100%. I think to be a good fighter, you have to experience fighting and you have to practice fighting. I think Sean Strickland says it the best when he says that, you have to practice fighting to be good at fighting. And so, and what's even better than practicing fighting, which is sparring, is having more fights, and realizing those ups and downs and those mistakes in the cage. I feel like that's when you learn the most. You can have a bad day in the gym, but you can kind of wash it away the next day, and have a good day in the gym. But if you have a bad day in the cage, that's something that's hard to forget, and so you can really try to learn off those mistakes.
This portion of the Burn Factory podcast is sponsored by Phoenix Salon Suites. Please visit Phoenix Salon Suites at PHENIX Salons SALON Suites SUITES.com to find one near you.
All right, Julian, it's time to go to R and burn. It stands for ridiculous. It's time to go to a happier subject, talking about all the unfortunate things. But being a professional fighter, there has to be one ridiculous thing that happened. You're just like, what just happened?
Could be a fan question. It could be like maybe some fan like yelled something at you, like making the walk. Is there kind of a ridiculous burn moment that you had to go through?
Like specifically with fighting. Oh, you know what? Yeah, there is actually. So there's a kid named Ryan Mulvihill. We're actually pretty good friends now, but if you look at my record, look at his record, we fought 3 times. And so what happened at first was we fought early on in our pro careers, and then we fought again after I beat him the first time, and we only had a couple pro fights. Then we both went on like 5-fight win streaks, and we were probably the toughest guys or the best guys in our region up in Washington. And so we ended up fighting again for a title, and I beat him again. And then one of his teammates that I was supposed to fight fell out due to injury, and he's like, what do I got to lose? I'll fight you again. So we fought again, and we kind of had this long-time rivalry, and that's kind of a story in itself. But we're really good friends now. Probably the closest guy that I've ever fought in relationship now, and really good dude. But the funny thing about fighting him, and it's only happened with him 2 times that I'd fought him. The first 2 times, I was defending shots against the cage, and my not my big toe, but my toe next to it dislocated in the fight, and I seen it happen. And I was like, the very first time it happened was the first time it ever happened in my life. And I don't know if it was because I was defending so hard that my toe was pushing in the mat and they just like clicked over. But I looked down at my toe and I was like, what the heck? And he takes me down because I was kind of like sidetracked, obviously. And I'm on the ground. I'm like, he was in my guard. I'm like, what the hell's going on? So I reach down, I grab it, I click it back in, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess it's fine. And then after that fight, it was definitely swollen, and it never happened again until I fought him again for the title. Sure enough, it happened again. I was like,
the same toe?
Yeah, it's so bizarre. I had no idea, and I equate it to his strength is wrestling and jiu-jitsu, so he was really trying to take me down. He's a strong guy, and so I had to give everything I had in, they call it kind of the Elvis Presley, but it's when you're like defending from the cage and you're kind of like wide like this, and I was pressing so hard off my back foot, and it was just pressing my toe, and my second toe was longer than my big toe, and so that could have been it as well, but it was so bizarre that it happened twice in my life, and it was only on fights with him. And and that's like probably one of the only big injury I've ever had in fighting. It was just my toe dislocating 2 times. Yeah, it's so random.
That's like chewing food, and once you chew food, you bite your lip, and then you bite it again. It's like, I can't stop biting my lip. What's going on?
Oh my God, that happened to me earlier today. It's funny that you say that.
It's the worst.
Watch, this is going to happen to me. And I know it's so mad just because I said it. But it kind of reminded me of like, once something happens, it can't stop happening.
You know what's so crazy though? It's like it's never happened after that too. Like I felt like, because it happened again the second time I fought him. And I was like, well, I guess my toe's more susceptible to it now. And I had a buddy who used to dislocate his shoulder a lot. And it got to the point where his shoulder would just pop in and out all the time, even when he would sleep. And so I was like, maybe when things get dislocated, they obviously don't, they're not 100% when it goes back in. And so I was thinking, maybe my toe's just going to be screwed for the rest of my life. But like, at least it's my toe and not my shoulder, and on my ankle, or not something else more substantial. But it just hasn't happened ever since then either. So like, just 2 times randomly with just that guy.
It probably got stronger from getting hurt.
Yeah. It'd be funny. You'd probably go roll around with him and it would come out again.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Would that be a coincidence?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That would be very interesting if that happened if we were doing that.
But so is that the only ridiculous thing you've kind of gone through in your career?
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, from being on the Ultimate Fighter show, me and Chris Gritzmacher almost kind of had a little scuffle on there inside the house because we drank a little bit too much and we're kind of joking around. I mean, that was a little bit of I'm very non-confrontational. I get uncomfortable with confrontation. And I'm the type of guy that you could say something bad about me or my family or something, and I would just be like, oh, I guess I see your point of view. I'm kind of like that, in the sense that, and so kind of like when, like if I ever get aggressive or like, confrontational, it's kind of out of my character. And so when I was on the Ultimate Fighter house, what happened too, because of the whole Artem coming back, what happened was we had 8 and 8 Europeans and 8 Americans. And obviously if there's 8 fights, there's going to be 8 winners, and they got to pin those guys together. But what happened was they brought Artem back, and they brought somebody else, Johnny Nunez, back on the American side. So there was 9 and 9. So after 9 winners, it's going to be, you can't match 9 guys up. There's going to be an odd man out. Yeah. So what Dana White said was, since there's going to be an odd man out, not only do you have to win your fight, but you don't want to be the boring fight. So if you're the boring fight out of the 9 winners, we're dropping that fight. It's like, that's crazy. So you win the Ultimate Fighter house and you could still get dropped. And so what happened was Chris Gritzmacher, I think, was the first fight after we got into the house, first or second fight, and won his fight. And it was a boring fight, honestly, and I'm not taking anything away from Chris because me and him are cool now as well. But when you're in the Ultimate Fighter house, you're just trying to win. You don't care how you get it. You just want to win to get to the next fight. And so we're not really. And I don't know if Dana White had said that before or after his fight either. So, but what was happening was slowly as the fights were going on, we knew Chris Gritzmacher's fight was the most boring fight. So we're like, well, you just have to be a bit more exciting than he was, which wasn't very hard to do to get to the next round. And so what happened was we drank a little bit too much one night, and he kind of overheard me talking about that, and I had a little less discretion on my end because I had a few shots and didn't really care if he heard me or not at that point, and so we ended up getting in each other's face, and it was kind of one of the things on the show that they built up a little bit, but we were swimming in the pool, and then we were outside the pool, and there was a bottle of water, and he threw the bottle of water at me. And I was just like, bro, I was just swimming. Like, that's not going to bother me. And I'm pretty easygoing. And then, but there was some steak sauce right next to it. He grabs that and he starts flicking that on me. Oh. And then I started getting in his face. And then we started, we had to get separated a little bit. I don't think we would end up fighting each other inside the house. because we knew the ramifications of that, or if you get in the fight in the house, you might get kicked out of the house and lose your opportunity. So I think we were just kind of gonna talk shit to each other, and it was gonna get kind of pushed aside. And but that was one of those things that was just like, I just felt so out of nature because I'm not like that, I and he was on my team too, like so there was no reason for me to pick a fight with him anyways. I was kind of just saying the truth. And honestly, what happened was after the 9 fights, his fight got dropped because it was the most boring fight. So it wasn't, I wasn't necessarily, making stuff up to cause a situation. It was something that was going to happen, and we all knew it. And I was just the one who said it out loud, and I was a little inebriated. So it kind of, made it easier for me to do that when I normally probably wouldn't have done that. So that's one of those times where, like I said, I haven't really watched much of The Ultimate Fighter that I was on because I hate seeing those kind of things that kind of contradict who I am.
Was it weird arguing with the cameras right there?
Well, it got to the point where, obviously right out the gate, the cameras are weird, right? So like there's always cameras in people's faces. And I even seen people, like the camera guys would come in and guys would wake up on their bunk bed and look over and the camera's in their face. And I'm like, that's a bit weird. But after, a couple of weeks, and not even that, it only took a couple of days for me to get kind of accustomed to it. You're supposed to act like the cameras are right there. Like they're I think, what do they call it? The third wall or whatever. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how they call it, whatever it is. But you're supposed to act like they're not around. And so, so after a week, everybody was pretty accustomed to it. And so like, even arguing with Chris, I wasn't even thinking about the cameras. I was actually just thinking about just kind of what was going on then. And I was actually thinking about like kind of because the European guys were sitting outside and they started like seeing like, what's going on here. So I was more worried about like other guys getting kind of like on edge because of it. I really wasn't even thinking about the cameras.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a lot of times like that in The Ultimate Fighter where you just are in the zone and you forget that the cameras are even there. Yeah,
it's one of those things that you get used to it because it's 24/7. So it's not like here and right now where like I haven't had a camera on me and then now I'm here with the camera.
Yeah.
Because I was getting a little nervous. I'm like, man, this is just being in here. I was getting a little nervous, but on the Ultimate Fighter House, the very first the first couple of days, you are nervous about that kind of stuff. And you're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. There's cameras freaking everywhere. You don't want to do the wrong thing and get caught doing something you're not supposed to be doing. And then after a couple of days, you just forget about them and you're just like, it's just normal, And if they would come in and out, it would have been different. But they were there literally 24/7, like, and so it just became something. It was something you got accustomed to, and it became natural.
Yeah. All right, Julian, it's time to move on to N. R was amazing. That's kind of so funny that your toe kept popping out with the same guy in 2 different fights, but N stands for now and next. So it's kind of 2 parts.
Yeah.
So are there any burn moments you're going through right now in your life? And are there any burn moments that you foresee coming up in the future?
Oh, man. I mean, for sure right now, I have 2 losses. My last 2 fights were losses in the UFC. And so once you start, kind of, tippy-toeing that line of, losing fights and you don't know when you could get cut. With the UFC, it's like one of those things that you just don't know when your time is up. Like they could call me tomorrow, and release me. So I'm just, I'm happy to be still in the UFC and, I'm hoping to get a fight soon. But it sucks to lose 2 fights in a row. My last fight was a little controversial. Fernando Padilla, I don't want to take anything away from him because he's a great fighter by all means, but I think Chris Taioni ended that fight a little quick. I think what happened was since he had dropped me the first time, Chris Taioni was already willing to stop the fight if I got dropped again. And so when he hit me again and I dropped to a knee and popped back up, he already had it in his mind that he was stopping the fight if that happened again. And then he, I think, even realized himself that I was okay, that he could have let the fight go a little bit longer. At least, I was kind of running off. And there's been other fights where I thought maybe it was a little soon, and I rewatched the fight, and I was like, nah, he stopped it. I'm glad he stopped it. And then, but with that fight, that's something that like eats at me a little bit because that was a fight that because I feel like that's happened to me a lot. Like Sean Woodson dropped me in that fight that I won. Charles Jourdain dropped me in that fight that I won. Nate Landwehr dropped me in that fight that I won. And I've always been kind of one of those guys that hangs around, and then I'll win the fight. You could beat the dog crap out of me for 14 minutes, but I'll be there in the 15th minute. And so, and I felt like that was going to be one of my strengths against Fernando is the second half of that fight. And so not being able to showcase that, and it felt like it was a little premature stoppage, is one of those burn moments for sure that like kind of resonate in my head. But it's one of those things too, like where in the wins or losses, you have to just kind of move past them. If you sit and you stew in losses for too long, it can sidetrack you. And if you think you're the man for too long after winning a fight, then I feel like it can also mess with your psyche. Some people, I feel like they want to just live in that win for so long that they're kind of afraid to move on to get another fight because they're, afraid of, losing that feeling. If you lose a fight, then you're like, then you feel bad about it, and then you want to find that winning feeling again. And so when people get a win, especially big wins, like even when I beat Hakeem Dawodu, it was like, I just wanted it again quickly. But some people, I feel like they just want to like settle in that win for months and months.
We were at that fight.
Yeah, I was fucking yeah. That was. I feel like that was one of my best performances, and it was more redemption for me because the last time I had been on a big pay-per-view was at the MGM. Coming off, it was my second UFC fight against Teruto Ishihara. He was fighting at Team Alpha Male, and ended up getting knocked out in front of everybody. And I hadn't had that fight, and also too because Joe Rogan only usually does the pay-per-views, and I've always been a big fan of Joe Rogan. So I was like, that was one of the things that was added pressure. Even back then, I was like, man, I want to talk to Joe Rogan. Like, I know if I'm talking to Joe Rogan, it means I won my fight, and I've always just wanted to talk to him. And in a cage, as a post-fight, a little interview with him. And so fighting Hakeem Dawodu at the T-Mobile Arena was that redemption. But the only crappy thing about that was I was the only winner of that night that didn't get to talk to Joe Rogan because I was the main event on the prelims, and it was running late. So instead of my interview, they had to start running for the main card. So I'm the only guy who won that night that didn't get to talk to Joe Rogan. And I was like, it was so... right after the first round, I had almost knocked out Hakeem Dawodu, and I looked over and I seen Joe Rogan's face, and he was like, because right at the end of that first round was pretty crazy, and so like I seen him, and I was like, oh man, that was like in between those two rounds, I was like, I can't wait to talk to this dude. Like I gotta go finish this guy, I gotta get this win. And things had been obviously working out well for me in that first round, so I was like, just keep focused. You'll be able to talk to Joe Rogan, and then after winning the fight, the lights kind of dimmed, and I was all like, yo, where's Joe at? And like I don't know if it was a commission guy or one of the UFC worker dudes, he's like, oh man, we ran out of time, bro. You have to go. And it's pointing me off stage, and I was like, man, like that was so disheartening for me because because I'd fought a bunch in the UFC, even before that, but it was all Apex stuff. So like literally the majority of my fights are the ones that I'd done well in, the 5 or the other 4 wins that I had, were at the Apex. And Joe Rogan doesn't really do the Apex fights or doesn't commentate them and do the interviews. And so I was so excited to redeem myself on a pay-per-view card. And one of the biggest ones, and one of the biggest like debacles too, like with the whole main event, like switching around. It was like with Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, and D-Rod, and all the other guys that had to get switched around. Like that was crazy. Like, so like it was just such a crazy a fight week for that situation. And then I was just so focused on redeeming myself on a pay-per-view card, and I was able to do that against, a guy who was top 15 at one point, and but not getting to talk to Joe Rogan was disheartening, to say the least.
2 questions. Did you see the fight break out backstage before the press conference?
I didn't.
No, you didn't?
No.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't at the press conference.
Oh, is it just all the main card guys, I guess?
I think so. Yeah. I think the press conference was just the main guys. I was at the ceremonial weigh-ins, but not at the press conference. Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't know that.
But was it? Oh, it was Diaz and Tony, or it was
Kevin Holland.
Oh,
right?
Kevin Holland.
Kevin Holland
right.
got into it with Shemaev.
Oh,
right? Yeah.
That's right. Maybe who knows? Maybe
I thought Diaz team got into.
Man, who knows?
I
feel like Diaz team is in all the issues at the press conferences, but it also makes you wonder a little bit about the whole Chimaev missing weight, and he missed it so comfortably, like the way he was like, whatever, like, and he didn't look like he was sucked up at all, like, when I make weight, I make weight, like, you can see it in my face, you can see it in my body, and Chimaev was just on the scale, he's like, looked like he was gonna make weight, like, I mean, obviously there was rumors that he was gonna miss weight, but like, he gets on there and he's like, the way he, as confident as he looked like he was a guy who's about to make weight, and then he's like, obviously missed by like 8 pounds or whatever, and it's like, So it makes you wonder because, you know, all the fights got switched around. So I'm so curious, like, if there was any, you know, background stuff going on that we don't know about.
And then the second part was, did you already have what you're going to say to Joe Rogan planned out in your head?
No, not at all. I was just going to, you know, I was just going to, you know, I was just excited to talk to him, you know. He's just one of those guys, you know, that I've listened to for a long time. I remember watching him on Fear Factor, you know, and you know, me and my wife listen to his podcast anytime we go on road trips, and you know, I've been a big fan of his, and you know, I agree with a lot of stuff he agrees with too, and he's just kind of a man's man, you know, a little bit as well too. So like, and obviously he's such a huge fan of MMA, and it's like, and it could be any fan. I always want to perform in front of fans, and so I just wanted to impress him, you know, and I know that he was probably impressed with that fight, but I just wanted to talk to him afterwards about it because I knew he would have been like, that was an impressive showing, like, and just like talk to me about it. And you know, I never really have anything in mind about what I want to say after a fight because you never know if that's going to happen. You know, you want to be optimistic about it, but I feel like when you think about those kind of things, you can give your hopes up a little bit. So like, you know, I was so focused on beating Dawodu, but I was, you know, I had a lot of things riding on it, including that. You know, and that was something small. You know, obviously I want to win my fight for my career. I want to win my fight, you know, for my paycheck. I want to win my fight for a lot of different things. But, you know, there's some small things in there, like talking to Joe Rogan after your fight. Like, that's a cool thing to do. You know, whoever gets to talk to Joe Rogan on a regular, you know, not on a regular basis, but anytime in their life, you know. So I know he's got a bunch of fans. So like, to have the ability to do that was something I was looking forward to. And, you know, hopefully maybe I'll get to do it some other time down the road. But I was happy with the performance regardless. And you know, I took it for what it was.
Congrats on that win, too.
Thank you so much.
All right, Julian, thank you so much. You just spelled burn in your life. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. So tell the audience where they can find you, Instagram, your social medias. Tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, obviously, if you want to reach out to me, my Instagram is the best way to reach out to me, Julian_Erosa. I had a previous Instagram that got hacked, and so they stole my blue check mark. But my new Instagram, which I've had for a while now, is Julian_Erosa. And I'm pretty good at responding back to people on my Instagram. I don't really use my Facebook as much. I have them connected to where everything I post on Instagram goes to my Facebook. But if you really want to reach out to me, it's my Instagram. And I also want to take this time to thank you guys for having me on the Burn Factory. And also, I always got to shout out my management and Jason House and Iridium and all the guys over there, because I feel like without them, I don't think I'd be in the UFC right now. So obviously a shout out to those guys, and a shout out to everybody that's watching this as well.
Thank you, of course, for coming on, too. We can't thank you enough. But as a gift for coming on the show, you will be getting the Black Label Edition Burn Factory hoodie, where only guests get these.
Oh, nice.
Only guests. So there you go.
Thank you so much, man.
Of
I'll support this with the utmost confidence.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate
Truly
it.
This thing is
appreciate
awesome,
it.
man. I really appreciate you guys.
Awesome.
Cool.
So that's going to do it from this episode of the Burn Factory podcast. Like always, like, comment, and share.
And please visit my foundation at thepriestjamesfoundation.org. Again, thepriestjamesfoundation.org to understand why this is called the Burn Factory.
See you guys for the next episode.
All right, guys, we're here with Julian Erosa, who just spelled burn in his life. And now he is the Burn Factory podcast champion.
That's the first of many more belts coming his way, that's for sure. But thank you so much for coming on, Julian. You have fun?
Yes, of course, man. I appreciate you guys and your hospitality, and I really appreciate the questions you guys asked.
Awesome. No, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. You're inspiration to us, and you're definitely an inspiration to a lot of people out there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.